Today, I get to share with you my interview with Beth Light. She is a mental health therapist and the clinical director at the Child Safety Center of White County, Arkansas. And she graduated from Harding University. They have developed a program that was basically came out of all of this research that Harvard did a study since the 1990s until about, I guess, through the 2000s, the early 2000s, and they based their whole program at this clinic on that study. We will put that in the show notes, of course, but it's so interesting to hear Beth and what huge strides are being made with children from birth to 18 who have suffered incredible trauma, and how this holistic, complete program of various modalities in healing, which are scientifically and clinically based, are helping these young people get to this place of healing that I wish I had been at when I was in my late teens. So I am so excited to bring her forward, her clinic. I hope we can model these advocacy centers for healing across the United States. And she has a specific thing she talks about, which I had never heard of. I don't know if you've heard of TFCBT. It's the treatment of complex trauma for problematic sexual behaviors. And so she's going to answer some questions about this particular advanced training model in healing. And I think you're going to be fascinated by Beth's interview with me today. Thanks for tuning in. Here's Beth. Hi, first of all, welcome to Beth Light. Thank you so much for joining us, Beth Light. I think you and Brooke, your sister-in-law, who is the photographer that we interviewed recently about her amazing pictures with letting kids be themselves and how she's getting these really just inner like beauty of these kids to shine through on her camera. And when she told me about you, her sister-in-law, Beth, I was so excited because you have been working with, child trauma and as a social worker since 2005, then a master's degree that came along a few years later, and have been in social services and in also other therapeutic forms of counseling and, clinical based things like you are certified in EMDR, which is something I'm a
Yes.
real believer in. You are also certified in a couple of other things that I want to talk about with you today. So first of all, thank you so much for joining us. 100%.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. We really love it when we have an expert. And usually an expert has some kind of a personal reason for being in the mental health, field and care. So I'm just wondering if there's a way that you would tell us. You don't have to go into any personal, experiences. You don't need to do that, but I would love for you to actually tell us why, at least a little bit, you are in this particular line of work and how you got here.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny how I came to social work. Growing up, I always felt very strongly that it was my purpose to work with kids. And I thought that I was going to be a pediatrician. And then I discovered that you have to go to med school and do some things that I didn't really want to do. So I decided in high school, well, that's not going to be the path for me. But I remember in the sixth grade, whenever we were in one of those health class experiences where they're doing some education and prevention work. That's the first time I heard a friend disclose anything about sexual abuse, was in the sixth grade. And then later on in life, I found out that that was something that had impacted my family of origin as well. And I didn't know a whole lot about that. And then I came to college and told my mom I didn't know what I wanted to do at that point. And so she said, well, you need to go do some aptitude testing, and you need to talk to somebody, and you need to figure out what is it that you're going to do. And so I did some aptitude testing, and I went to a psychology seminar where they talked about what psychology is. And they mentioned social work in the psychology seminar. And I had never heard of social work at that point. And it sounded like something I would really be geared toward. And so I met with an advisor, and the rest is history. I declared social work, and then I was all hands on deck, both feet and ready to go. Yeah.
Wow. So it resonated with you because you have
Mm-hmm.
some, effects from the family aspect that
Mm-hmm.
you didn't even know about. And then
Mm-hmm.
also sixth grade is pretty young to
Mm-hmm.
go, oh my gosh, what's happening? And this is happening. And then to realize as you grow and become an adult and you're in the field, how common this abuse has become, almost to the point where I think people have become numb to actually being upset about it. And
Mm-hmm.
that really bothers me because I'm like, oh my gosh, we seem to want to solve all the other, really traumatic issues of the world. But what about this that's more
Yeah.
common than cancer, that's more
Mm-hmm.
common than, any kind of combination of physical ailments? It's just like, to me, almost always the origin of where so many other things stem from. Is
Yes.
that something that you would say I'm right about? Is that true? Because I see it over and over when I have a hands-on experience, with a group of, people maybe they're in rehab, and I've spoken
Mm-hmm.
to groups there. And when we go back far enough, before the alcohol or before the addiction or before the cutting or before the anorexia or the bulimia or the rage or the mental, breakdowns that they're having,
Mm-hmm.
was abuse,
Mm-hmm.
sexual abuse in their
Mm-hmm.
childhood. Tell me what your thoughts are on that.
I would agree that there's generally some history of trauma in early childhood that impacts the lifespan. I didn't find the adverse childhood experience study until around 2014. I had begun working at the Child Safety Center at that point and was doing some research to try and figure out, what all is connected here, what all do I need to know. And I found the adverse childhood experiences study, and um, it blew my mind. And I thought, well, I'm late to the game. Everybody else must already know this. And over the last decade, I've seen no, a lot of people don't know this. And so, some of the work that we do is education and prevention, and that's a big part of it, talking about adverse childhood experiences and what that means and what that can lead to. Yeah.
So, when you talk about this study, can you tell us more about that? Because it seems to me that that's what the work is based on now. So, as a mental health therapist and the clinical director at the Child
Mm-hmm.
Safety Center in your county,
Mm-hmm.
um, what was that study and that paperwork? What did it mean to this? Well, it meant something to you personally, but what did it mean to the field of what you're doing in the work of healing and helping children, tweens, teens, young people come out of or get through what's happened to them?
Yeah. Um, so there's an overlap, I think, in the Child Advocacy Center model and then the outcomes that we learned from the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. So that study began in mid 90s or so in San Diego, and it really was sparked kind of as an accident. Dr. Vincent Folletti was working in an obesity clinic and wasn't getting the results that he wanted and expected. And so then he asked a question. He misspoke a question, and the answer that he received really kind of illuminated his awareness of, okay, there's something else going on here. And so then that kind of sparked the study and the trial. And what they found is that there's a dose response in terms of early adverse childhood experiences. So, if that's witness to violence in the home, if that's a parent with mental illness, if that's physical abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, if that's the incarceration of a parent, those early experiences kind of stack in our system in terms
Mhm.
of how our brain responds in that fight flight mode. And then that increase in cortisol and that stress response over the lifespan brings about medical diagnoses that impact a person. So health disease, heart disease, cancer, other forms of disease. And so that's a medical model that's really understanding or looking to understand how those early adverse experiences impact our bodies physically. And so then from the mental health point of view, taking that and saying, okay, but there's also work that we can do on the mental health side that maybe can stem some of those outcomes. So can we do early intervention? If we know about this event early and we intervene early, does that offset long-term consequences? So that's kind of been, the last decade has been a constant state of learning for me.
Wow. So what you're saying is that there is an absolute relationship, there's an absolute connection between mental health, childhood trauma, and physical health.
Yes.
So this really is so important that if we're going to have better physical health or not develop some of these outcomes that are, life threatening, we have to deal with, or we hope to deal with, the mental health and the trauma sooner and earlier so that we can mitigate those physical things that will also manifest because of them. And there is science-based proof connection to that. And I think mental health had such a hard time getting off the ground as people would sort of go, yeah, well, whatever. Everybody has bad days. Everybody's depressed. Everybody's this, everybody's that. I've heard that a lot of times where people are just so kind of like, it's not a real thing. And I'm like, it's a real thing. When you're a person who has survived an actual, long-term exposure to stress and to abuse and any of those things, even if you don't have, like, you're not a mess right after. Like, I just went back to school and became, as perfect and as smart and as, straight A's as I could become. It wasn't until years later that I started to experience the manifestation of what had happened to me in my world. Now, I had been through multiple marriages and divorces. That was connected, but I didn't even know that was connected. And so I think it's such an important thing. So your training in TFCBT for, the treatment of complex trauma and problematic sexual behaviors. That's what that stands for, if I'm saying it
Yes,
right.
that's right.
Okay. Tell us about being nationally certified in that training, complex trauma for problematic sexual behaviors, TFCBT. Can you tell us why that has become something that is such an important piece of this conversation in
Yes.
health and healing?
Yes. So TFCBT is trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy. And then they have applications for complex trauma and applications for problematic sexual behaviors. And that is a model that was developed in the 90s as well. And really, a lot of research has been done and replicated again and again and again over the last 30 years that demonstrates its effectiveness. So it's a short term, limited CBT based treatment. And it really approaches trauma in a way that offers skills. At the beginning, it's offering a lot of skills, education, relaxation, affective modulation. So learning, what are my feelings? How do I feel them? How do they show up in my body? And then what do I do with those feelings whenever they're present? And then cognitive coping. So how do I retrain my brain to think differently about the experiences that I've had and about experiences that I will have? How do I learn healthy coping skills? How do I learn to manage the stress that exists in my life? And then there's a trauma processing portion where you're able to discuss the event that occurred and talk about how that impacted you, what you thought, what you felt, how that shows up today. You share that with a supportive caregiver to increase support and resilience. And then safety is a component throughout that process as well. So talking about body safety, future safety, and then also talking about what do I want to be when I grow up? What do I want to do when I move forward from this? And so trauma treatment early on, especially with, young kids and adolescents, it's shifting the narrative essentially away from this happened to me and this defines me, to this happened to me and I still get to define who I am.
I
And
love that.
I love being a part of that work. Yeah.
Yeah. Boy, I can see that as being like one of the most important things that happened for me. And I was about 30 years old when it came, that
Mhm.
realization came through a weekend program, sort of a self-help program, that I did over a weekend. And at the end of it, it was like, oh my gosh, I am free. You mean this that happened to me? I am not a victim. This doesn't have to define the rest of my life. I get to make all the choices. I get to call the shots. I get to sit in the driver's seat of my life.
Yes.
It really didn't dawn on me because I'd had so many problems with my confidence and with so many different relationships and all of the things that I just felt like I kept failing at,
Hmm.
jobs and keeping a job and all the things that make, I guess, in my mind would have made me a successful person at that time. And it wasn't
Yeah.
until I did that program that it really came to me very powerfully that I was holding on to something I could let go of. And by
Mm.
doing that, I could be free to make my choices of who I was going to be when I grew up. And I was 30 when that
Yes.
happened to me. And so I love how you said that. If you could have that kind of training, that kind of, counseling or therapeutic, assistance to figure those things out earlier as a teenager
Hmm.
suffered from child abuse or an early adult whose brain is still developing who's suffered from rape or abuse in their teenage years and
Hmm.
find your way in this. I can see why you're so excited about it because it makes all the difference when
Yeah.
you finally get back into the driver's seat of your life. So again, tell us again what it stands for. TFCBT. One more time.
Trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy.
Okay, beautiful. And now at this center where you're working, this is the model that you use at your center. And tell us how it's going. I mean, what have you seen in these 10 years where all you're doing is learning and studying? Because honestly,
Yeah.
this mental health, body connection, scientific based neuroscience, the parasympathetic nervous system, and all of these things coming together that now has science behind it for
Yes.
healing. It's not just woo woo in the sky stuff. Tell me
Absolutely.
about what you're experiencing, what you're seeing at your center.
Yes. So, our center is kind of a mid-size in terms of child advocacy centers. Last year, well, we're a center in a rural state and in a rural county,
Okay.
and we also serve three other counties that are nearby. And so, last year we saw over right around 500 kids in the year. And so that's definitely grown over the last 10 years. Whenever we first started out, 2 to 300 was average. So that's grown.
Yeah.
Um, and my role has been from the beginning to establish a mental health program, so that we're able to assess and screen each child that comes into our center and talk about as a team, what are their needs in terms of mental health treatment? How are they doing? What do they need? How can we connect them to either a provider in their community or keep them here so that we're able to serve them here?
Hmm.
Um, and we've tried to build our skill set along the way too. So TFCBT is the training that I started with, and then I added CPP, which is child parent psychotherapy, and then I added EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And so I want to be equipped as best as I can to serve as many kids as I can and meet the needs that they have where they are. I started out as the only mental health professional on our team 10 years ago, and now we have five licensed clinicians on site. And so
Wow.
I feel very proud of that for sure.
That's really amazing. Honestly, Beth, you're doing something so important and so dear to my own heart because I believe that if children tweens, teens, young adults can access healing as soon as possible, and it will be ongoing because, as
Hmm.
I'm sure you know better than me, what you can process and heal to a degree when you're 8 or 9 years old is going to be different than when you're 13 or 14 or 18 or 19 or 22 or
Absolutely.
23 and 30 and
Absolutely.
31 and on we go into our 40s, right? But
Yes.
getting some of
Yes.
those basic tools in the toolbox as soon as possible is huge for people to go, uh-oh, I need another tool, or I got to sharpen this one, or I got to have some help, and not being the kind of person that stays away from the doctor because, oh, they might have bad news. And
Hmm.
for us, for those that are healing from trauma and that are on that journey to stay in the driver's seat of their life and to have freedom from what happened and be able to make their decisions of what will happen next in their life, is really such a gift to be giving to mankind, and to do it in a rural area. I know the center is located somewhere in Arkansas, and I don't know how specific you want to be. I don't know if there's, if you get like crazy people that are not happy with what you're doing, or, it's an interesting thing how many can't live with the idea that this is so common, and they almost want to shut it down or minimize it, like I
Hmm.
said before. And so hopefully you're getting great support. Where do you get the funding from for your center to now go from 1 to 5 professionals? Where does that
Yeah.
come
So we are a nonprofit. Advocacy centers are nonprofit. They're independent organizations. They're third party. So they operate as a part of a multidisciplinary team in the coordination of investigations. But what that means is, being a nonprofit means that you have to really search for funding.
from?
And so we are an accredited center through National Children's Alliance. So we get some funding from the federal funds that are available. So Victims of Crimes Act, the VOCA Act. TANF right now has increased their funding since COVID. So we get some federal funding through grants, but the majority of our funding comes through like local support grants and local grants, state funding, and local community support. And so that's an area of our center that we have really been working to increase over the last 2 years, so that we can continue to function. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's really
yeah.
something, isn't it? I wonder sometimes about, um, there's certain trauma centers that are funded more from a federal perspective, like, the VA hospitals for
Hmm.
veterans.
Hmm.
They've suffered, PTSD and have all these same outcomes. But it has been said and has been proven that the same kinds of things that a combat veteran could experience in the mental health and all of the other things that come with having been in combat are the same things that a child, a tween, a teen, a young adult could also be suffering from because of their PTSD from sexual assault and violence, abuse, rape, incest, all of those things.
Yeah.
Do you do you have hopes that at some point this kind of work can be legislated for and have funding come from not only good people who want to support good things, which is what I hope for,
Hmm.
as well as, I have a foundation, the Jan Broberg Foundation, that's a nonprofit and depends on
Hmm.
people donating to that healing. You know, they want to see survivors heal. They
Hmm.
also know that legislation needs to change to be more in
Hmm.
favor of those who are victimized and harmed
Hmm.
instead of perpetrators and predators, which is how the system seems to be currently. So those are two of the things that I work on very hard. And then awareness. is the third thing, which is what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
This podcast is about awareness. So those are my 3 pillars of the foundation. And if we
Mhm.
don't have that local support, if we don't have support from our, some of the grants that we can find, there are some, but it's much harder, I think, than people realize for us to be able to actually do this work. So
Yes.
what do you think? How should we proceed there? Because it needs to be
Yeah.
funded.
Yeah. So the Child Advocacy Center model began in like the late 80s in Huntsville, Alabama. And it was a local prosecutor who actually said, like, we are doing more harm to children in this process than we are benefiting them. And so the model has kind of spread from that point. So his name was Bud Kramer, and he was a prosecuting attorney in Madison County, Huntsville, Alabama, in the 80s, but he went on to be a congressman. And so there is some awareness at the federal level. The National Children's Alliance, which is the accrediting body for advocacy centers, has a lobbying arm. And so they are able to push for some, funding, but there has been a decrease in funds available at the federal level over the last couple of years. And so that is, definitely something that needs to be addressed. And they were able to do some work on the VOCA. We called it the VOCA fix, kind of internally is what National Children's Alliance referred to it as. But we're hoping that will increase the funds available to us from a federal level. But always there's more work to do, I think, always.
And I think that it's been underfunded for all of these many, many years, just in general,
Mm-hmm.
because public outcry has to match what we say to our, those that we elect and in our local and our, state government, and then those that go forward
Mm-hmm.
into the federal spectrum in Washington. And I think it's really important that we tell our stories, and that we have the voices, the many voices that can make even our own families and our neighborhoods, our
Mm-hmm.
community centers, our congregations aware of
Yes.
how rampant this abuse is, and that it is worthy of being funded by our voices, and by dollars and cents.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I think I think we're starting to see an opening where people are speaking out more, they're talking more, but I don't know that people have made the connection that in order for us to have professionals who have a healing center, basically, is what you've
Mm-hmm.
what you're doing, it has to be funded. It's
Yeah.
like saying that, if you can sing, that's a natural gift and talent that you don't get paid for. And I'm like, well, if that's how you make your living, you still
Right.
have to get paid for that,
Right.
when it's on a professional level. And yet you
Right.
have people that don't make the connection, like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
kids are resilient. Oh, it'll be okay. Oh, that perpetrators just did it that one time. They'll stop. They don't even go to jail. They just
Yeah.
figure they'll that's one and done. And it's not that at all. That is absolutely not what happens,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not at all.
Not at all. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, there is a
Yeah.
lot of work to be done.
There is.
Let me get
Yeah.
off my soapbox and back to you. Okay. So,
Yeah.
you were a case manager for a residential treatment center that was focused
Mm-hmm.
more on drug and alcohol addiction in
Mm-hmm.
teens and young adults. Tell me what that experience was like. Do you have any certain, in a general sense, of course, not sharing any names or anything, disclosing
Mm-hmm.
anything, but at the same time, that you would say, this is what led to this drug and alcohol addiction in these teens and young adults. And so let's solve the genesis, the point of the problem. So can you talk about any of that
Yes.
in your experience? I think that's a really interesting thing where I've had some experience in just speaking to groups or being there,
Mm-hmm.
to hear their stories and to realize that almost all the women that I've ever had in a group like that today they were all sexually assaulted or abused as young
Mm-hmm.
people. And they're
Mm-hmm.
teens, they're teens and young
Yeah.
adults. So it was prior to that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. My time there was, again, a great learning experience. I came there after working in, child welfare front lines. And that was, I describe that time of my life as a brick to the forehead. in terms of reality, smacking me in the face. So I saw a lot that I wasn't really prepared to see and didn't feel very well equipped to manage in my own personal life or respond to. And so I left child welfare and went to be a case manager at this residential treatment center and learned about trauma. And that's really where I got kind of an introduction to trauma work and how important that is, how critical that is.
Okay, so it was smacked you in the face,
Mm-hmm.
basically.
Mm-hmm.
So what you saw was the direct connection between where they were now in
Mm-hmm.
a drug,
Mm-hmm.
alcohol addiction. That's
Mm-hmm.
where they're at now. But
Yeah.
what happened before
Yeah.
was something that seriously compromised their development
Yeah.
as a person,
Yeah.
and that
And
they were self-medicating.
yeah, for some it was sexual abuse. For some it was, inner family dynamics that were not healthy or significant loss and grief at an early stage in life. But very often, um, trauma was at the root of the reason that they were at that treatment center. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's really interesting. So when okay, I know that you went back to graduate school
Mm-hmm.
to get your higher education and degree. And that internship that you had with the Child Safety Center in the
Mm-hmm.
first year it opened, is that
Mm-hmm.
what your job that has continued on? That's where you are
That's where I am
still.
now. Yes. So
Wow.
yes, that was they were opening, they were developing the Child Safety Center during that time, and I have been very fortunate in my career to have been mentored by people who are doing incredible work, and so because I had these connections, our founding director was a foster parent that I had worked with when I was when I was working in child welfare, and so I knew her and. Another one of the founding people was a professor and is still my mentor today. And so they were collaborating with also people that I had worked with in the child welfare office that I had been in. Um, and so I was kind of brought in with these people that I already had a good working relationship with, and they understood my skill set and they believed in me and supported me and said, okay, this is what we want, this is what we need, and we want you to be a part of it. And so being able to see that very early on, and then of course, because it was a nonprofit that was just beginning, I didn't have a position funded, at the very beginning. And so um, they helped me get the training that I needed to be able to serve kids who were coming through here. So as I was working at an outpatient agency, I was able to take referrals from the center during that time and kind of began working with um, children who had been seen at the center. And then whenever funding became available for a position, I was asked to come on. And so that's been 10 years now, which is wild how quickly that's gone.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing. That shows what good relationships, being a good student and a good person can get you into something that you're passionate about, and you
Mhm.
just keep at it until the funds come. And that's sort of where
Mhm.
I tell people all the time, you just got to keep at it until if that's your passion and that's what you're kind of called to do, you're going to
Mhm.
do it or you're going to be miserable. So you just keep going. I know the money makes the world go around, but it doesn't make you happy.
No, it doesn't.
So,
Yeah.
so that's really impressive that you stuck with that and that you are there still today. And that
Mm.
was in 2008 or 9, you said,
Yes. Yeah.
in your bio?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's
Mhm.
quite a long time. So you really have some proficiency now in this whole thing that I am so fascinated by, because I'm hopeful that what we can do is help take these, like this particular program that you're talking about, and be able to replicate it, into
Mhm.
many health centers like what you're doing across the country, so that there's
Yeah.
access to this kind of healing and this kind of therapeutic, and all the different areas. Like you said, you continue
Yeah.
to get, certified and in many different modalities of healing that are
Mhm.
science based too, we actually know they work. So
Yes.
I love it. I just love that. So how, as
Mhm.
you look back at your career so far, and you're still young, but I look at that as that's a long time, even though, to be in one place at one thing, building that after, almost 15 years, really, how has that affected you personally? What has that brought to you on a personal level? I'd really like to hear a little bit about that because it's sometimes it can be
Yeah.
overwhelming to work in this field. I've been sharing my story and hearing other people's stories and sharing their stories and trying to make change and awareness happen for a long time, and it can be difficult. But how about you? How has it affected you personally?
Yes, that's a good question. It's a tough question.
Yeah.
um, yeah, uh, I think whenever I stop and sit and think about that, there is a lot of good and there is a lot of hard, um, and both are true. Two things can be true. I love the work that I do. I love being able to connect with children and families in what's often, the worst times of their life. And I feel like it's a real privilege to walk alongside people during that time, which is sustaining for this work. It helps me feel like there's purpose um, and it's important, and so I am fulfilled in that way. It's also really difficult and has definitely impacted the way I parent, the way I respond to my own kids, the precautions that we take in our life around our kids and their peers and who they spend time with and where they go. And there are nights when I can't sleep, and that's true. Those are all true. And so it's definitely taking it has taken a toll, and it's not all negative, but it also has required me to do my own work and to recognize when I am depleted or when I need to take a pause to take a step back and tend to my own business. So it's both. There's good and there's hard.
Well, and that's a good reminder, I think, for all of us that self care is really necessary. That
Mm-hmm.
as we build resilience in our lives and as we heal, as we try to help others, because we know what it's like, we've been there, we still have to take some time to care for our own mental health, our own
Mm-hmm.
physical health, our emotional health, our spiritual health, all of those things that are really truly they work interconnectedly. What what challenges do you see, Beth, in the child welfare system in general? What
Mm.
challenges? Where do we have the holes? What do we need to work on? A better solution to remedy? Just a few things there would be really nice if you have any solution to those challenges. And could you speak a little bit about those challenges?
Yeah, that's another big question. Um, yeah. So I'm gonna maybe take a long and winding path to get to the answer. And I don't know if I have solutions, but I have a lot of thoughts. So we'll see where those land. Um, so
Perfect.
the Child Advocacy Center model is MDT based, and so multidisciplinary teams are formed from law enforcement, other investigating agencies, prosecuting attorneys, child welfare. There's a medical component to it and a mental health component to it. And so the idea behind that MDT approach is that all facets of a child's needs are being considered whenever they come to a center like this. So on site, there is forensic interviewing. Then there's child and family advocacy, a person that follows that family until they no longer need them. There's medical on site, so any exams that need to be done can be done here in house. And then there's mental health on site as well. So the center functions as a hub, essentially, where all of the people who need to be involved in an investigation involving a child can come, rather than that child having to go to all of those other places. individually. So that's the beauty of this model. And, it's meant to be trauma informed, child friendly, and child centered. And I think it is a huge piece in addressing some of the challenges in the system as a whole. But there are also a lot of challenges that remain. So thinking about, child protective services or child welfare workers, those agencies are generally understaffed, underfunded, under-resourced. And it is, I had that job as a 22-year-old out of college, and I was not prepared for. I was prepared in terms of education. I was not prepared in terms of understanding real world impact or what to do about it. And so I think, there's a lot of work to be done in terms of equipping people who are on the front lines, not just education wise, but how do we connect to resources? How do we increase prevention? How do we approach families in a way that they're not defensive right away so that we can make headway with them? How do we teach kids what it looks like to be a part of a healthy family? How do we teach families what it looks like to be a healthy family? I think there's just a lot of areas where we can do more, when we can do better. But I think it also takes a multidisciplinary approach. I don't think there's one right answer. I think it's sitting down and coming to, what is good, and how do we share what's good, and how do we respond in a way that builds families and doesn't continue to tear families apart. And how do we move toward restoration for people across the board?
I think that's really well said, because in my experience, I believe that people are almost, to me, doing their best, but without enough, again, resources of time, energy, mental care for themselves. When you deal with this subject, day in and day out, and you see, one child or teenager or person, a young adult, of full-grown women and men who are trying to heal, but didn't even get started till their 40s and 50s, have just started to tell their stories and let the secret out of the bag because they know it's going to hurt their family, because for the most part, it was a family member. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's when you talk about healthy families,
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about the fact that something is not healthy in the family, and how much shame comes with that, which is why it's kept a secret so often.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of protecting the child, it's the family name,
Mm-hmm.
because, oh, we're going to be people are going to think there's something wrong with all of us. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just such an interesting dynamic. And yet, if we would fund and get the help and get enough people working at this and helping with this multidisciplinary model, as you're talking about, which I totally believe in as well, because
Mm-hmm.
something is going to have, more traction for a person in their healing, and something else might be good, but it may not have as much traction as something else does. But
Mm-hmm.
all of them together combined
Mm-hmm.
is what synergistically heals. It's
Yeah.
not just one thing or one idea, it's many
Mm-hmm.
things. And a lot of times, those that are trying to access that kind of care can't afford it.
Mm-hmm.
So many times, the person who has gone through abuse also has a problem in marriage relationships, in work relationships, in holding a job, in getting getting an education, having a career, and balancing their own issues that are there with being productive. I
Mm-hmm.
heard it stated that a woman who has been through abuse, severe trauma in childhood, will lose out on about $1 million over the course of her career life
Wow.
because of these very things. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like, even economically, it would make sense if that's just one person. And if we have 25 million children right now who are being abused in some way, shape, or form, and I think that number is low,
Mm-hmm.
but it's they say, oh, it's about 10% of the population. And I'm like, who just turns a blind eye to 10% of the population?
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Yeah.
That's a lot
It's a
of young
lot.
people, a
Mm-hmm.
lot. And I think that's a low number. And
Mm-hmm.
then you're still dealing with everybody that is now an adult trying to deal with what happened to them as a young person.
Yes.
Now, at your center, do you primarily, what's your age? Do you have an age range that you deal with? Tell me, what is that?
We do. We see from birth to 18.
Birth to 18.
So the full range of childhood we is the population that we serve, and
Okay.
any services that we offer here on site are free of charge to the families that come.
Oh, that's so amazing. These are the models we need everywhere. So for me, in the work that I'm trying to do, my thing is to open up that healing to adult survivors
Mm-hmm.
of childhood trauma and abuse,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
because that is also where that trauma is passed on, that abuse is passed on, even if
Mm-hmm.
it's not directly that you are sexually or physically abusing your own children or somebody else's.
Mm-hmm.
You pass the trauma on when you yourself are not healed and go through multiple relationships, or you have a drug or alcohol problem, or you are, you have one of these many things that we've listed in
Yes.
your own life, because you're still mitigating what happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
You're still not in a healed, space, and that does pass on the trauma. So it could be directly, or it could be just by the fact that you are also easily outraged, or easily
Mm-hmm.
crying, or always depressed and anxious, or overly stressed all the time, because those are the outcomes of combat. And
Yes.
our combat just happened to be in the home, or by a trusted friend or coach or school teacher, or a clergy. I mean, there's so many that are close to home that we don't have to go outside of that hardly ever to find that the root of the problem is somebody that should have been nurturing and
Mm.
caring for, but instead harmed that young person. And it is so disruptive to their development. And so when you have adults who haven't healed, then they're in that place of passing it on. And
Yes.
so for me, it's like, okay, I want this opened up to adults. Beth, as a mental health care practitioner, you must deal with a lot of anxiety and stress and emotional pain, as I know I do sometimes. What have been the most important things that you have done to care for your own mental health and your own healing?
Um, I think it's a combination of things for me in my life, honestly. I think connection to faith and a faith community for me has been is restorative and helpful and healing. Having strong supports in my life in terms of strong friendships. I have an excellent partner, and so just knowing that I have people in my corner that are rooting for me and that are there for me makes a huge difference. I think community is a huge part of healing. And just um, learning to recognize what it looks like for me when I'm not at my best, and then being able to lean on those supports that I have in my life, and say like I'm not okay right now, and I need some help. And just having the support and the safe place to do that, I think makes a huge difference. And then seeking my own therapy has been a big part of it as well along the way.
Yeah. So the therapist needs the therapist.
Absolutely.
That's really good to hear. And I think it's really important so that those of us that are not therapists don't avoid therapy,
Yes.
you know? And of course, I mean, talk therapy, psychotherapy of any kind. I know for me, reading certain things,
Mm-hmm.
books that I've read over and over, and having a strong support system and having community has been hugely important in my own healing as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, Thrivivors, our online community that is part of our foundation and our work in bringing people together so that they have that peer-to-peer support, that
Mm-hmm.
sometimes a family member that doesn't understand, or a partner that has a hard time hearing about the abuse, or understanding certain things. When you have a peer that understands because they've been through the same things that you have been,
Mhm.
it really is, I'm finding that it's incredibly helpful and healing. So I encourage people to find a community like that, even if it's not in your immediate physical. Maybe you live in a rural area or you
Mhm.
just can't find it in your big city. Come join an online community like ours, or something else where you have people that get it. And we do live events and things like that so that you get to actually see each other and ask questions, and you have become friends. And it really has been amazing how much it's even been such a positive, in my own healing journey. And I thought, I've done a ton of healing of lots
Mhm.
of different things, but man, just having that community um, is really amazing. So I'm really with you on that. Find your tribe, get your
Absolutely.
community in place. And it may not be those that are in your immediate family circle. And many people, because of the abuse being in their family, it's definitely not in their family circle. So I think that's really wise to concentrate on. If I haven't found that group of people, or that,
Mhm.
those special people, I need to seek it out. It may not come just naturally. I have to actually seek it out. So,
Absolutely.
oh, that's really good. Thank you so much. Will you tell us if there's something that I've missed, about the healing center that that you could point us to, where we could get more information online about the model that you are working with, the study that you mentioned
Mhm.
that this is all based on?
Mhm.
It would be really interesting if we could let our listeners know how to find more information.
Yeah, absolutely. The Adverse Childhood Experiences study, the CDC website online has a vast amount of information about that. And Center on the Developing Child from Harvard University also has some fantastic resources available that connect to that work, and also supporting children in early development to offset the impact of ACEs.
Mhm.
National Children's Advocacy Center, the NCAC, online, is the original center, and they do a massive amount of training and education, and they have so many resources available to learn more about advocacy centers. And then National Children's Alliance, also online, is the accrediting body for advocacy centers, and they have a wealth of information there as well. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to go back through those. Maybe we'll have you send those websites or those, things to us so
Yeah,
we can put them in our show notes as
absolutely.
well, because that's a lot of wonderful, wonderful things to go to as a, at least a first step in, is there something in my area? And we've been trying to
Mhm.
put together some of those, like we know these things exist, and these are national, these are state, these
Mhm.
are maybe in certain counties. But what we want is to take what you're doing and figure out how we can make that happen in communities across the country,
Yes.
because it is a comprehensive approach.
Mhm.
I have so loved our interview. I want you to know that I just have such admiration for you, Beth, in what you're doing. And I know it takes a toll when you work day in and day out with survivors, especially hard to see children who
Mhm.
are surviving such difficult traumas, and to have all that empathy and the heart involved, as well as trying to get the science and the medical and all of those things to come together. It's a real intricate nut that you're trying to crack there.
It is.
and
Yes. Yes. Thank
and when you have
you.
children of your own, your big heart just, you're like, can it keep expanding and loving this many people? And it
It
can. That's the
can.
beauty
Yes,
of it.
it can.
But it can take an emotional toll if you don't know how to let it kind of work through you and
Mhm.
not take it all on.
Mhm.
You have to be the vessel, right?
That's
And
right.
not that's really important, for our own self care. So thank you for mentioning that. Parting words, anything that was left out that you were like, oh, I wanted to talk about this. One last parting gift for us.
No. I don't know. Nothing that stands out that I really wanted to, say and feel like I didn't have a chance to. But I do want to just say thank you to you for the opportunity to be here and share my experience with you. And also thank you for the work that you're doing. It takes a lot of bravery and courage to share your own story and to be a person that's willing to be the face of a movement. Takes a lot. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you, Beth. I appreciate that. And with that said, everyone, I always like to end by saying I know there is another side after trauma.
Mhm.
And so with Beth Light being our guest today, thank you so much for your generosity, your wisdom, your time. And I will see you and everyone listening on the other side of trauma.
Thank you.